representative government, a common language, entrepreneurship, a multicultural society grappling with the legacies of slavery and racism, a society connected to the rest of the globe through trade, politics, and culture. These are defining elements of the modern United States. The roots of the modern United States are here, in historic Jamestown, where people from 3 continents struggled in the birth of a new society.
American Indians,
Europeans,
Africans.
Our Virginia Indian ancestors had a culture that was complex and successful. It had its own government, religion, and traditions.
Most of our 17th century African ancestors who came here were taken away by force from their homes and cultures.
our English and European ancestors came to Virginia hoping for better prospects than those back home.
Here, Powhatan ruled a paramount chiefdom that included most of the 15,000 Virginia Indians of the Tidewater region.
Our Virginia Indian ancestors had lived in this area for more than 10,000 years. They called this region Chinokomoko.
On May 13, 1607, 104 Englishmen and boys landed here. They named the place Jamestown to honor the English king. It was the first permanent English settlement in North America. The Virginia Company's Royal Charter and Instructions defined the English mission to establish English dominion in territory claimed by Spain, to establish English Protestantism, and to turn this region's natural resources into profit for the company's shareholders. Fragments of Jamestown's 17th century life tell the story of the people who met on this spot. Written documents and objects found here in the ground shed light on these people's many experiences.
American Indians,
Africans,
English,
the first English structure, the fort, was built hastily after a skirmish with Virginia Indians. The island site was defensible, but it was swampy and had no streams of fresh water. Within the fort, settlers quickly built shelters against the weather. Archaeologists have found evidence of both peaceful and hostile encounters between the English and Virginia Indians.
English armor and guns speak of warfare between the English and Powhatan's people.
but pottery demonstrates that Virginia Indians brought gifts of life-saving food, traded with the English newcomers, and likely lived and worked inside the fort.
The English brought iron tools, copper, and beads to trade for food. The company instructed them to trade for corn and other food.
Virginia Indian women were the main producers of the corn the English needed to survive. They found that Powhatan was a skilled, experienced trader.
But starvation nearly wiped out the colony in the first few years.
We brought nothing into this world, neither may we carry anything out of this world. Man that is born of woman haveth but a short time, to the Lord take is full of misery.
In the winter of 1609, hundreds of English died from disease and starvation.
He flieth as if it were a shadow.
The Virginia Indians may not have had enough to feed their
In
own.
the midst of life we be in death.
Relations with the Virginia Indians broke down, and the English were afraid to leave the fort to hunt for
And
food.
therefore commit his body to the ground.
John Smith reported that a colony of 500 was reduced to 60 survivors.
Dust to dust.
Today, we have a partial explanation for the starving time. Growth rings extracted from ancient bald cypress trees show that the colonists arrived in the middle of a drought that lasted several years. Despite the hardships in Jamestown, the Virginia Company continued to send more settlers from England.
Settlers experimented with one possible product after another to find a profitable export.
Colonist John Rolfe tried growing a Caribbean strain of tobacco that was favored in England. In 1612, he succeeded. By 1616, tobacco fever raged. This single profitable export ensured the colony's economic future. Plantations spread outward from Jamestown, and for the rest of the century, efforts to start other enterprises suffered because tobacco promised a better return. In 1619, the first legislative assembly in the English colonies, the Virginia General Assembly, met in a church whose foundations can still be seen at the site of the Jamestown Memorial Church.
Two supreme councils in Virginia.
That representative legislative body set a precedent, one built upon nearly 2 centuries later by the framers of the United States Constitution.
Being enacted by its present assembly.
Englishmen were making laws in Jamestown a year before the Mayflower landed in Plymouth.
In the same year, 1619, people from a third continent, Africa, arrived in the Virginia colony.
In the first century of the colony, Africans experienced the full range of status: freedom, indenture, enslavement. Their skills and labor contributed to the colony's economy and its stability.
Also in 1619, the Virginia Company recognized that families would make a more successful colony than single men. The company recruited and sent 90 additional women. They would marry and establish households, raise food and livestock, and, with their Virginia-born children, would be the key to a permanent English presence. The settlement grew into a port town with permanent brick structures. People came here to do business, to seek justice, to record property transactions, to visit and exchange news. Wealthy and prominent colonists built houses that reflected their positions in the colony's social and political hierarchy. Jamestown was the commercial, political, and administrative center of the expanding agricultural colony. The money came from tobacco. Who would provide the labor to grow all that tobacco?
English.
Virginia Indians.
Africans.
Africans made up a small but growing proportion of the labor force. Over the century, the Virginia Assembly passed laws that, step by step, separated African status from that of English indentured
According
workers.
to the condition of the mother.
Most Africans and some Virginia Indians were enslaved. By the end of the 17th century, Virginia laws defined a slave labor system that would shape the economy and condemn African Americans to a subordinate status for generations to come.
To be realistic.
From the time of the English arrival, Virginia Indians fought to protect their status in their homeland.
In 1622, Paramount Chief Opechancanough organized a major attack against the English. In 1644, he led another.
Opechancanough was arrested, imprisoned here at Jamestown, and assassinated.
In 1646, Paramount Chief Nakatawanse agreed to a peace treaty that reserved land north of the Pamunkey River for his people.
For the Virginia Indians, peace reflected diminished power and numbers. Over the century, the English colony's population approached 60,000 people, but the number of Powhatan fell from 15,000 in 1607 to about 2,000. In 1676, Nathaniel Bacon led a rebel army into Jamestown to demand more vigorous suppression of the Virginia Indians along the colonial frontier. Governor William Barclay refused, and the rebels set fire to the town. As the century drew to a close, the Virginia colony was far different from its Jamestown origins in 1607. English plantations spread for miles in all directions. England's flag, its laws, religion, and language were all firmly planted on American soil. In 1699, colonial leaders moved the General Assembly from Jamestown to the more centrally located new town of Williamsburg. Jamestown Island became the site of 2 plantations. Farmers' plows turned only the top layer of earth, leaving much of Jamestown's buried history undisturbed. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jamestown was preserved and protected as a national treasure. And archaeologists have recovered a unique record of the 17th century that brings our heritage to life. Here is the first permanent English settlement in North America. Here, 3 peoples came together and formed a new society, what would become the United States of America.
Walk the very ground they walked.
Put yourself in their place.
Imagine what life was like for them.
Listen for the echoes of the voices of Jamestown.